Don Tapscott è un relatore piuttosto famoso, credo che l'abbiate potuto vedere tutti coloro che sono appassionati dei TED Talk. Lui ha parlato a diversi TED Talk, ha parlato in diverse conferenze. La sua organizzazione si chiama Blockchain Revolution e lui ha scritto anche un libro sul tema. E sarà qui in una, diciamo, versione molto particolare. La tecnologia, che è spesso amica ma non sempre, ci accompagna. Serviranno un paio di minuti, forse un pelo di più. Viola? È pronto? Perfetto. Lasciamo la parola a Don.
Ciao Enrica.
Hi Larry.
So, how are you doing this afternoon in Torino?
Very well, thank you. And you?
Well, perfect. It's great to be here in Toronto and being with you at the exact same time. I'm the CEO of Art Media, and our business is taking the best in the world to the rest of the world, and you're in for a very special treat today with Don Tapscott.
Thank you, Larry, for helping us and make this happen.
No, we're thrilled to be able to participate. If you'd like, I can take a moment to tell you a little bit about my friend Don.
Yes, please.
Okay, so Don Tapscott is the executive chairman of the Blockchain Research Institute. He is one of the world's leading authorities on the impact of technology on both business and society. He has authored 16 books, including Wikinomics, How Mass Collaboration Changes Absolutely Everything, which has been translated into over 25 languages. Don's most recent and ambitious book was co-authored with his son, Alex Tapscott, a globally recognized investor, advisor, and speaker on blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies. Blockchain Revolution, How the Technology Behind Bitcoin and Other Cryptocurrencies is Changing the World, was first published in May of 2016 and is, according to Harvard Business School's Clay Christensen, the book, literally, on how to survive and thrive in this next wave of technology-driven disruption. The paperback version of the book, updated with new material covering recent developments in the blockchain industry, was recently published in June of this year. In 2017, Don and Alex co-founded the Blockchain Research Institute, whose 80-plus projects are the definitive investigation into blockchain strategy, use cases, implementation challenges, and organizational transformations. Don is a member of the Order of Canada and is ranked the second most influential management thinker and the top digital thinker in the world by Thinkers 50 out of the UK. He's an adjunct professor at INSEAD and is the chancellor of Trent University in Ontario. It really is hard to imagine anyone on the planet who has been more prolific, more profound, and influential in explaining today's technological revolutions and their impact on the world. So enough about Don Tapscott, enough of the introduction. And thank you very much for allowing us to join your conference today. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my great honor to introduce my friend, Don Tapscott. Have a good conference.
Thank you, Larry. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Ciao.
Ciao.
Buongiorno. Hello. It's great to be with you today in Torino, Turin. This is a wonderful opportunity for me to at least have my bits with you if I don't have my atoms there. I'd love to have my atoms there as well. We could go out and have a nice glass of Italian wine afterwards. Anyway, I have a very big idea to share with you today, which is that the digital age is entering a second era. And I came about this kind of fairly honestly, I guess. I was asked to write the 20th anniversary edition of my book, the digital economy, which some of you may remember came out in 1994. And I reflected on what had occurred in the last decades and where we were going forward. And I came to the conclusion that the digital age is really entering a second era. We had mainframes, minis, the PC, then the internet, mobility, the web, the cloud, the mobile web, social media, big data, and now technology is infusing itself throughout everything. We have technology that does things that it wasn't programmed to do because it's able to learn. The physical world is becoming smart and interconnected and soon doing transactions. There'll be cars driving around the streets of Italy that are autonomous vehicles, not in 50 years, but they'll dominate probably in 10 or 15 years. We've got technology into our bodies, into every physical process, into the inanimate world, and technology basically is becoming part of everything. And any company, every government can become a digital company or a digital government. I'm convinced that the foundational technology for all of this is the underlying technology of cryptocurrencies called blockchain. Blockchain. It's not the most sonorous word in the world, but I'm convinced this technology is the operating system for the 21st century company. And furthermore, will represent the second era of the internet. So let me explain that idea. For the last decades, we've had an internet of information. But when I send you information, a PDF, a PowerPoint, a Word document, I'm actually sending you a copy. Even with a website, I keep the original. But when it comes to assets, things of value that belong to somebody, things like money, or stocks, or bonds, or futures, or contracts, loyalty points, intellectual property, cultural assets like art or music, a vote is an asset, something of value that belongs to somebody. You could have a carbon credit, even our identities. Copying these is a bad idea. You don't want someone copying your vote or your identity. And if I send you £1,000,000 lira, it's really important that I don't still have the money. And cryptographers have called this the double spend problem for decades. And the way that we manage this problem in our economy is through intermediaries, banks, stock exchanges, governments, credit card companies, now social media companies, perform all the business and transaction logic for every type of commerce. They identify the party, you are who you are, that's a dollar, the asset, or a stock, or a vote. They clear and settle the transaction, and they keep records. They enable us to trust each other, and overall they've done a pretty good job. But there are growing problems. They're all centralized. It means that they can be hacked. The banks, for example, exclude a couple of billion people from the global economy. They slow things down. It shouldn't take a week for money to move from one country to another. Some assets on Wall Street take weeks to move up the street. They charge too much. Why is it 10% to send money and from one country to another? And the biggest problem is that we create this data, they capture the data, and the results have been a bifurcation of wealth. All around the world, we have growing economies, declining middle class, and declining prosperity. And it means that we can't use this data to plan our lives, we can't monetize the data, and our privacy is being undermined. So, what if there were not just an internet of information, what if there were an internet of value, some kind of vast, global, distributed ledger, where anything of value from money to stocks to bonds to a vote to art could be managed, stored, transacted in a secure and private way? What if there were a native digital medium for value? Well, that's where Bitcoin comes in. 2008, an anonymous persons named Satoshi Nakamoto wrote a paper that solved the double spend problem. He outlined a new form of digital cash called Bitcoin. And for the first time ever, people could do transactions peer-to-peer. And this was an extraordinary thing because people could send money from their device directly to somebody else's device, and trust was not achieved by a middleman, but by cryptography, collaboration, and some clever code, which is why my son Alex and I call it the trust protocol. Trust is native to the medium. Now, don't be confused by Bitcoin. Bitcoin is an asset, goes up and down. It went way up. It's come down a lot. It's sort of, who knows? It's a store of value. It's a currency, and there are some uses for currency that's not controlled by a state. But the real pony here is none of that. The real pony is the underlying blockchain technology. Now, how does this work? Well, you know, Mark Twain famously said to a friend, "I'm sorry I wrote such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short letter." It's taken me 3 years to be able to say this in 3 minutes, okay? So I'm going to describe to you how a blockchain works. And I'll pick Bitcoin as the first type. So that $1,000 transaction I sent you is broadcast out to a global network of computers. And all around the world, there are a group of people called miners. These are people with computers that have computing power estimated to be 20 to 50 times bigger than all of Google. And the miners do a lot of work to validate the transaction. And every 10 minutes, kind of like the heartbeat of a network, they create a block. And that block contains all the transactions from the last 10 minutes. Somebody sent someone some money, or could be, ultimately, they bought and sold a stock, or two people got married, or a land title was registered, or a light bulb bought some power from a distributed power source. And then the miners use this computing power to validate the block. And the first miner to do that receives some of the cryptocurrency from that blockchain. And then, this is the important part, that block gets connected to the previous block with a digital wax seal to create a chain of blocks. And if I wanted to hack that block, I'd have to hack not just one block, but the entire history of that blockchain, not just across millions of computers around the world, but all of them using the highest level of cryptography. And while the most powerful computing resource in the world is watching me, so make sure I don't mess around. Now, I'm not going to say that's impossible, but it's tough to do. Now, I used an analogy recently to explain why that was tough to do. And John Oliver on public television did a whole show in the United States on national television about blockchain, and he had some fun with the analogy. Let's watch it.
And because of the complicated process the network uses to verify records, it is very secure. Now, relax. I'm not going to get into what that process is or how it works, but I will share a really helpful, really dumb metaphor for why it is safe.
The way I like to think of it is that a blockchain is a highly processed thing, sort of like a chicken McNugget. And if you wanted to hack it, it'd be like turning a chicken McNugget back into a chicken. Now, someday someone will be able to do that, but for now, it's going to be tough.
Hold on. That is an absolutely horrible thought. So why is that reporter so happy about the idea? Because if anyone ever figures out how to turn a chicken McNugget back into a chicken, that chicken is going to be up. He's going to spend the rest of his life suffering from PTSD and writing haunting poetry about the experience. The things I saw, buck, buckaw. My body is whole, but what of my soul?
My body is whole, but what of my soul? So, Bitcoin was to blockchain as email was to the internet. It was the first big application, and it played a very significant role, obviously. It was the first blockchain, but underneath it. But now we have general purpose blockchains that look more like the World Wide Web, where you can build any application on top of them. Hyperledger, for example, from the Linux Foundation. Or there's a blockchain called Ethereum that's worth tens of billions of dollars, its currency is. And Ethereum has something called smart contracts, which are very powerful. A smart contract is just like what it sounds like. It's a contract made of software, and it has a software lawyer and a government and a bank inside the contract. And a lot of what we do in a lot of business applications are basically contractual relationships between people, and these can now be turned into software. So in 2016, my son Alex and I wrote the book Blockchain Revolution, and it turns out he's a better writer than I am, he's smarter, so I'm very proud of this book. It is the big bestseller on blockchain in the world, and it's in, I think, 16 languages now. And there's a new edition that's just come out in English, a paperback edition. It's called the Updated Edition. And the way to get this book is in massive volume. Buy millions of copies of this book. Christmas is coming soon. No, seriously, I'm very proud of it, and I hope you enjoyed it. So let's talk about its impact on the economy and on society, on social innovation. Well, let's begin with the banking system. When I was writing the book, I asked Alex, who's an investment banker, what do banks do? It seems so complicated. And he came back a day later and he says, I think banks do 8 things. They attest to and authenticate value. You are who you are. That's a dollar, that's a pound, that's a lira, that's a stock, that's a vote, for example. They move value around, and because they transfer value, they get to do things with it. They can store it, and because they store it, they can lend it, and they can also exchange value, do transactions, create marketplaces like stock markets. They can fund and invest value. You got venture capital, investment banking, mutual funds, hedge funds, private equity, and so on. They insure value and manage risk, and they also can account for value. The auditing companies, the big accounting companies, and they audit value. Every one of these can be replaced by some distributed applications on a blockchain. Now that's not going to happen because the banks are working hard to reinvent themselves. But I'll just give you an example. In the book we said, the first edition 2 years ago, we said, we think the venture capital will be unrecognizable in 5 years. Well, we were wrong. Venture capital is basically unrecognizable today through this thing called initial coin offerings. These are sales of digital assets called tokens on a crowdfunding campaign using a blockchain. And in 2016, these things raised $165 million. Last year, in 2017, it was close to 5 or 6 billion, depending on who's counting. And this year, it's close to $20 billion, 2018. So this is a big deal because all of venture capital is just a few times bigger than all of that. So one of these ICOs was $1 billion. That's not even venture capital. That's real money. That's investment banking. So it's important to understand, though, that these are not just selling currencies. It's not just about cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. You have platforms like Ethereum, and I described that. Cosmos, it's a very important platform coming out. There are utility tokens. The Golem network is creating a cloud that uses your computer. It needs a token to compensate you for giving up your computer when it's not being used. There are securities tokens that represent stocks and bonds and swaps, could be anything. And these should be regulated fully by the securities regulators in any country. There are natural asset tokens that could represent a tree or a barrel of oil or a synthetic asset like a carbon credit. I'm involved in something called carbonex.ca that wants to turn all carbon credits into a token so that they have liquidity and they can be saved and bought, and sold, and turned into fiat currency, real money. There are crypto collectibles that can be synthetic, like a crypto kitty. These things are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But there are also collectibles that represent a physical work of art of some kind, or a trading card, or anything you might want to collect. And finally, there are crypto fiat currencies and stable coins that are pegged to an actual currency. Now, how does this change the corporation? Well, almost 90 years ago, a Nobel Prize winning economist named Ronald Coase asked a deceptively simple question. He said, why do corporations exist? Why do we have firms? If Adam Smith is right, and the open market's the best mechanism to allocate goods and resources and information and so on, why isn't everybody an independent contractor at every step along the way in production? And he said the answer is, and he won a Nobel Prize for saying this, the answer is transaction costs. And he defined this very broadly. He said the cost of search, finding all the right people, right money, right information. That'd be prohibitive. So we bring it inside a firm where we have filing cabinets to find information, org charts to find people. The cost of coordination, getting all these people to work together. In an open market, that wouldn't work. So we bring them inside the firm. We have management structures and compensation systems. The cost of contracting, if every little activity in the economy needed a contract, well, that wouldn't work. So we bring them inside the firm. Overall, the cost of establishing trust. Well, blockchain is going to devastate these transaction costs. Look at the case of ICOs, the cost of search, of finding money. You used to have to go to venture capitalists and so on. Now you hold an ICO and the money is there. So the industrial age corporation did everything from soup to nuts. And then we saw the rise of more extended enterprises with the early days of IT and the internet, and the boundaries of companies became more porous. Then, with the Internet of Information, transaction costs dropped further. The Cisco Business Web on the screen here is a picture of the Cisco ecosystem. And they focused on what they did best and partnered to do the rest. And now with blockchain, these transaction costs are going to drop more and more. Now let me give you a crazy example of that. In the book, we said, could you have something called a decentralized autonomous enterprise that had no people? It'd be highly automated and be super complex. We almost didn't publish this because we thought it's just so far out there, but we did. A week after the book came out, an organization was launched called the Decentralized Autonomous Organization. It had no CEO, no management, no people. It was a bunch of distributed applications on a blockchain. And it went about to raise some money because it was going to invest this money in startups. In 3 weeks, it raised close to 165 million US dollars. And this was like crazy. Now, it's not a happy ending because there was a problem, a coding error in one of the smart contracts. And the creators of this thing decided to give the money back to the investors. But this was an extraordinary example of how, think about it, a company with no people that could do something like that. So Bob Dylan, there's something going on here and you don't know what it is. Buckle up. Now, what does this mean for business models? Well, here are 7 of 100 that we're studying in the Blockchain Research Institute. Blockchain cooperatives. Uber and Airbnb are not really sharing economy companies. They don't really share. They're service aggregators. But you could create a true cooperative. All the owners of beds and rooms and couches could get together and create blockchain Airbnb. It'd be a distributed application on blockchain. You show up, you turn your key, it initiates a smart contract. After you leave, the smart contract initiates the payment, and you rate it 5-star. That's on a database that can't be hacked. And the owners of these properties get to share cooperatively in all the wealth that gets created. There are all these parties, secondly, in our economy that create rights. They're not fairly compensated. Musicians, 35 years ago, you write a million-seller single, you would receive $46,000 in royalties. Today, you get $35. The Internet of Information broke our intellectual property regime because we didn't have a native digital medium for value. So all we could do is copy things like songs, but they're not information, they're assets. So today we have people like Imogen Heap, the British singer-songwriter, Grammy winner. She's created a blockchain platform. She's posted a song up there. It's inside a smart contract. And the smart contract specifies the intellectual property rights. And you want to put it in the movie, and the song says, what do you want to do? You want to make it a theme song or background music, somebody's going to sing it? She says the song acts as a business, collecting money from me and protecting my rights. The re-intermediaries, y'all know about disintermediation. I think Western Union is in danger of being disintermediated on the global diaspora, close to $1 trillion of people who've left their ancestral lands and they send money back home. Well, you can't charge people 10% anymore because companies like Paycase will charge 2%. It goes from my mobile to somebody else's mobile directly. There's no intermediary. The $50 trillion supply chain industry is about to be disrupted by blockchain. One Belt, One Road, linking Hong Kong and Rotterdam, the biggest supply chain in the world, is using blockchain for its trade finance. Number 6, animating the physical world. Billions and trillions of inert objects that become smart communicating devices. And when that light bulb buys some power from a distributed power grid through an auction, that transaction is not going to go through Visa. The Internet of Things will need a ledger of things. You have platform builders like Cosmos and like Aeon and like Icon and like Polkadot. Ethereum was the first important platform. And these are platforms for the new enterprise and the new economy. And then you've got what happens to big data in a world where we can capture our own data and use that data to manage our own lives. How powerful would that be? Data in a black box on a blockchain, and it's sweeping up all this transactional data. Everything you do on social media, everything you buy, your location, your heart rate, your score on a test. And the virtual you is now captured by you. We can get our identities back and manage them responsibly. So these are big, big things. And for companies, you get bigger data and better data, but they're going to have to negotiate with us to get access to it. Huge changes to government, too. Now you've got governments around the world exploring using blockchain to reinvent the basic operations of government. And I mentioned CarbonX.ca, turning carbon credits into a token. And you'll buy that carbon neutral cappuccino machine because it comes with carbon credits that you can trade and that you can turn into money, into a fiat currency. Secondly, democracy. We have a crisis of legitimacy of our democratic institutions, typified by what's happening in the United States. Young people aren't voting, and government for the people, by the people, of the people. Not many people who would agree with that. 95% of Americans think there should be background checks for firearms, but Congress can't pass a law reflecting the will of the people. So we can move to blockchain, and that can bring about some really big changes. And that's very important because legitimacy is the idea that you may disagree with who's in power, but at least you think the institution is a big one. Now people are questioning the institution of democracy. So in the first wave, we created these representative institutions, but there was a weak public mandate, inert citizenry, and representatives were beholden to these big, powerful interests. We can create a second era based on a culture of public deliberation, transparency, where sunlight is the best disinfectant, and where we have active citizenship and representatives that are accountable to citizens. There are all kinds of ways that this can be done, and again, we talk about these in the book. E-voting will never work. You're never going to vote on a computer and trust it until you have cryptographic proof that your vote wasn't double spent, right? That it wasn't cast for someone else other than who you voted for, or cast again. And we can build more transparent democracies, and we can have votes that are smart, that are inside a smart contract. And finally, people around the world are not going to be doing transactions in Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency. They're going to do transactions in the dollar, in the pound, in the lira, and the euro, and in the yen, and so on. And that's because central banks are going to embrace blockchain for their fiat currencies. So these are some big changes in government as well. Let me close. This is a big change. And this is a new paradigm, a mental model. And when you get a change like this, you get a crisis of leadership. How is your company, how is your country going to find leadership for change? Well, what we found out is that leadership can come from anywhere. It's great when it comes from a CEO or a head of state, that's rare. But it can come from anywhere within an organization. That means leadership is your personal opportunity. What's the future going to bring? Well, I'm kind of the theory that the future is not something to be predicted, it's something to be achieved. And we can achieve a very bright future if we will it. So let me end with an analogy, and it goes as follows. Alex and I have studied hundreds of organizations in the Blockchain Research Institute, but recently we've been studying nature too. Bees come in swarms, fish come in schools, starlings in the moors of England come in something called a murmuration. It's a word in the English dictionary. It refers to the murmuring of the wings of the birds. And starlings are out over a 20-mile radius throughout the night, and they do their starling thing, forage for food and so on, and at night they come together and they create one of the most spectacular things in all of nature. The murmuration has some functions. It warms the birds up for the cold night ahead. And a big one is it protects the birds from predators. You can see in some of these pictures on the right of the screen, for example, a hawk, a fierce killer of starlings, 25 times the size of a little bird, being chased away by the collective power of the bird. And scientists that have studied this say they've never seen an accident. And there's leadership, but there's no one leader. And when the moment is right, this magic happens. So is this some kind of fanciful analogy, or might we actually learn something from this? Well, the murmuration functions according to the 7 principles of the trust protocol that we outline in the book, Blockchain Revolution. Remember I said trust is not achieved by a middleman. There's no middleman here. It's achieved by collaboration and cryptography and clever code. This is a big collaboration, and there's code in the DNA of the birds that gives it some rules. One rule is don't get too far away. Another rule is don't bump into anybody else. The murmuration has a great interdependence. When I'm speaking to CEO audiences, I tell them, you know, business can't succeed in a world that's failing. It's interdependence. We're connected. And the murmuration functions as if the interest of an individual bird is connected to the interests of the murmuration as a whole. And overall, this thing has something that we call integrity. And that's the foundation of trust. Like, what is trust? Well, trust is really the expectation that the other party will act with integrity. Trust is the expectation that the other party will act with integrity, that they will do the right thing. And that's why a little tiny bird will chase after a predator 25 times their size, because they know that the other birds will do the right thing. They trust the other birds to have their back. So imagine if we could connect ourselves on this planet with some kind of vast network of glass and air and cryptography and code that enabled us to trust each other in some new ways. What would that mean? Surely we could do some extraordinary things. Because the world needs to be more distributed. People and individuals and little organizations need to have more power to fight against the big forces that are happening in our global economy today. And if we do this, maybe the smaller, more distributed world that our children inherit might actually be a better one. You see, what's happening is once again, the technology genie has escaped from the bottle. Summoned by this anonymous person at this uncertain time in human history. And it's not going to solve all of our problems because only people solve problems, but it gives us another kick at the can. It gives us another opportunity to rewrite the economic power grid and the old order of things for the better, but only if we will it. Are you in? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Don, for your incredible insights on a topic that can appear somewhat intimidating at first, and yet at the same time, it holds incredible possibilities on how the world will possibly change and be influenced by the blockchain. The T4 conference has a few questions that they've shared with me, so I hope you don't mind shedding a little light on these topics. The first question is, are there other countries with a more mature economy similar to Italy that have done a great job embracing the digital revolution that we should be looking to for ideas to emulate?
Well, yes, there are. First of all, what do you need to do to be the Silicon Valley of the second era of the digital age? It won't be Silicon Valley, probably. Well, you need to have entrepreneurship and the conditions for that to occur. And that means good funding, but also a government regulatory environment that encourages these new forms of raising funds for startups, token offerings. You need to have good talent, good university. It's great to have a good domestic market. It's good to have strong thought leadership and research. And it's helpful if your banking sector is also an innovator, because banks are at the center of a lot of these big changes. And it's also critical that governments are supportive. First of all, as a model user, just using the technology. And we've used these criteria to evaluate different places in the world. And the best regions that come out are places like Zug and Zurich in Switzerland, Singapore. New York is doing terrifically. Toronto and the corridor around Toronto and Waterloo. Silicon Valley is up there in the top group of 10. But there are other locations too. Shanghai in China. Now, I'm sorry to say that of the top 15 that we've evaluated, Italy doesn't have a region that is in that group. But we're in the very early stages of this, and it's just a question of political and business will that problem can be solved.
Thank you. The second question is, how do these new digital technologies work within the framework of IP and IP law?
Well, the key here is blockchain, because we now have a way of protecting intellectual property, and not just someone's patent, but protecting other forms of property, like, say, music or art, that in the first era of the internet was undermined for the reasons that I described in the talk. We can also protect physical property as well, like land titles. 70% of the land titles in the world, in the developing world, are not enforceable. And Hernando de Soto, the great Latin American economist, says that this is more important than being banked, because if you don't have a valid title to your land, you can't borrow against it, you can't plan for the future. So blockchain holds a lot of potential for protecting intellectual property in ways that the Internet of Information actually violated.
So, what do you see as the timeline when blockchain technology will begin to have adoption and a corresponding impact by small and medium-sized business?
Well, you can see that small and medium-sized businesses beginning to take advantage of this technology already. You know, what Imogen Heap is doing with music, for example. These are for individual songwriters. And this is going to evolve out over a number of years and ultimately decades, but it's a very exciting opportunity to create a halcyon days of entrepreneurship. First of all, small companies can use the technology now to raise funds through having token offerings. But little companies can also have many of the capabilities of big companies without the main liabilities like deadening bureaucracy, legacy culture, and so on. So it's a great time to be an entrepreneur. And when you couple blockchain in with machine learning, artificial intelligence, I mean, the owners of vehicles are going to become business people as these autonomous vehicles move around making money for them. So thumbs up to small business. The technology should help us.
And the last question, and you may have already touched on some of this, are there specific examples of public-private partnerships involving educational institutions, research centers, government and business that have resulted in positive fundamental change on how digital economies have been advanced?
Well, certainly there are all kinds of examples of these partnerships, and it may sound a little self-serving, but I'll give you one. The Blockchain Research Institute is funded by 50, 60 companies, but also by governments in various countries. And we work with academics. We have as our founding academic partner INSEAD in France, often rated as the top business school in the world. And then we have a whole number of small businesses that we call blockchain pioneers. And we collaborate together to do research into the strategic issues around the second era of the digital age. And we hear from the various participants that this is having a big impact. And this material over time is being made available publicly, and you can find out about that by going to blockchainresearchinstitute.org.